So that's the end of my introduction. Once again, thank you so much for coming. Our first speaker, which is really going to talk about the message of ASHRAE, is Ginger Scoggins, who is a licensed mechanical engineer for 34 years. She is the president and co-owner of Engineered Designs up until last week when she sold her partnership, and she will be starting a new chapter, and we're very excited for her. Ginger is a certified commissioning agent as well as a certified energy manager. What's most spectacular about Ginger is she started at ASHRAE in 1988 when she joined the Triangle chapter in Raleigh, becoming the first female president of the chapter in 1995. So only 7 years it took everyone to realize Ginger's greatness. The first female vice president and the first female director and regional chair of Region 4. So a real groundbreaker. Ginger was recently named Fellow of ASHRAE and is currently President of ASHRAE, and I believe the end of your term is July 1st. So let's all give Ginger a hand and welcome her to the stage.
We're going to take a couple minutes here. Oh, that was quick. Okay. So I'm going to start. First of all, let me say, welcome, everybody. This should be an exciting program today, and I'm excited to be here. So on the stop, I'm on a whirlwind tour here of giving this message out to all of our chapter members pretty much around the world, and I'm excited to be here as part of this presentation today. So I'm going to start with a video, and then we'll move into the presentation. So let me ask you guys, looking around at the audience here, how many of you guys remember the 1970s? I always get a chuckle out of people when I talk about the 1970s because it was a really exciting time to be a teenager in the 70s. It was a lot of fun, right, being a teenager in the 1970s. I was fortunate enough to be a fairly young teenager during that time. And this was a decade really before cell phones, before the internet, which I know my kids don't even understand a time before that, and even computers. We didn't have computers in the 1970s. So it was a much simpler time in those days. But, you know, as a teenager, I was really only vaguely aware that the world was experiencing an energy crisis, right? So I wasn't driving yet. And apart from long lines at the gas station when I went with my parents to get gas, really it did not impact me much, except for the fact that we had air conditioning in our home. I'm from Tennessee. It wasn't ubiquitous in those days as it is today, but we were not allowed to run it because conserving energy in the 1970s was the focus of the time. Energy prices were rising, gas prices were rising. My mother, being the mother that she was concerned because there was a rumor during that time that if you spent too much time in air-conditioned environments, you became addicted to the comforts of controlled environments. Some of you might remember those days, right? And you wouldn't go outside. And we're seeing a little bit of that today, maybe, but you know, during those days, we wouldn't run the air conditioning, so we would have to go outside and play where it was cooler. So conserving energy was the focus of the 1970s. And little did I know that the organization to which I would be a volunteer member for most of my professional career, which is ASHRAE, was already hard at work creating the first version of an energy standard to address the challenges of the 1970s. And while today we take standard 90, now known as 90.1, for granted, during the 1970s, the ASHRAE Board of Directors had a big discussion about whether it was within our purview to take on this challenge. And they just finally decided to move forward with standard 90 and accept the challenges of the 1970s by reducing energy. And since the 1970s, we've gone from approximately 20% of homes in the US having central heat and air conditioning to over 70% today, with that number still rising. And this is being seen in most other parts of the world. Today, buildings account for nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, and this number is not expected to decline in the near future. So, we see where we've come from in the last 50 years. Where will we be 50 years in the future? From a global perspective, today, more and more people around the world are seeking to improve their quality of life, and our world population has more than quadrupled in the past 100 years. And between now and 2060 or 2050, the world population is expected to increase another 1.9 billion people before it starts to decline. And by 2050, 7 billion people, approximately 70% of the world's population, are projected to live in urban areas. And to meet these demands, the global building stock is expected to double by 2060, meaning we're going to need an additional 2.5 trillion square feet of building stock to support population growth that we're going to experience. Most of that growth is going to occur in the global south, Africa, Asia, India, but it's going to have to happen to support the growth that we're going to see. So to break that down a little bit more in simpler terms, you guys know very well what a New York City is. We're going to be adding a New York City to the planet every 34 days for the next 40 years. So think about that, right? An entire New York City to the planet every 34 days for the next 40 years, which is an enormous challenge and an enormous opportunity for our industry. Because even with the advent of AI and with education and training, we're going to need to more than double the number of people working in this industry to accomplish the goals that we have to accomplish by 2050 and beyond. So 50 years ago, when it was hotter inside my house than it was outside, we went outside to cool down. Today, we're dealing with conditions in many parts of the world. It is much hotter outside than it used to be, which is driving people inside to controlled environments to escape the climate extremes we're seeing across the globe. And it's estimated that climate change migration, which refers to people leaving their current habitats for one more stable in terms of climate-affected events, will impact over 100 million people by the year 2050, with a possible 2 billion people being directly affected. Sorry, Scott. In the next 50 years. So this migration is due to hang on a second. This migration from current habitats to other areas of the world is due to rising sea levels, rising temperatures, and natural disasters. Climate migration from rural to urban areas will result in hotter city environments, increasing the need for additional air conditioning and more refrigerant use, creating a circular loop of hotter cities, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more energy consumption. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. The increase of commercial and residential air conditioning loads in the coming years is anticipated to stress the power sector, potentially being the cause of grid outages, leaving people without the ability to operate their air conditioning systems during extreme heat events. So you could say we're living in a climate emergency, and our desire to be more comfortable has brought us to a place where we need to make some uncomfortable decisions. And we're seeing the examples of the impact of climate change around the world. This is a personal example for me. After graduating from college, I relocated to North Carolina. The Outer Banks of North Carolina are part of an intercoastal waterway that runs from Massachusetts all the way down to Texas. And this waterway protects thousands of homes from the worst effects of hurricanes because they lie behind barrier beaches. Based on scientific data, North Carolina has warmed by 1 degree Fahrenheit in the past 120 years, while the Earth as a whole has warmed by nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit. 2019 was declared North Carolina's warmest year on record, going back 125 years. If emissions continue to grow, North Carolina is projected to warm an additional 6 to 10 degrees by the end of this century. So we've gone from a 1 degree rise in 125 years to a 6 to 10 degree rise in the next 70 years, which will be catastrophic, obviously, for our state. So with the rise in air temperature comes the rise in water temperature, leading to additional acidification of our oceans. And it's estimated that most of the Outer Banks will be lost to erosion if sea levels rise by the 2 feet predicted to occur by 2100 at this point. So, and while this occurrence is personal for me, there are so many similar events around the world, right? And it's affecting all of us at different levels, whether you know it or see it yet in this area of the globe. And warnings from scientists on greenhouse gas emissions are not new topics of discussion. In the mid-1800s, pioneering scientist Eunice Foote was the first scientist known to have examined the warming effects of sunlight on different gases and to suggest that an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would change the atmospheric temperature and have an effect on climate. She published the only 2 scientific papers in the field of physics to be written by an American woman prior to 1889, where she hypothesized that changing amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere would alter the climate. Her papers, however, were presented to the scientific community by a male colleague for reasons unknown today. She died in 1888, and for almost 100 years, her contributions were lost. But recently, it was discovered that her work predated work by other scientists by 5 years, making her the rightful first vocal climate change advocate, which I, for one, am excited to know the rightful first vocal climate change advocate was a female. I find myself wondering what it was like to be a female and a scientist in the 1880s. Can only imagine. I know what it was like to be an engineer and a female in the 1980s, a scant 100-year difference between Ms. Foote's career and the start of my own. And while women in scientific fields had made significant strides, obviously, from the 1880s to the 1980s, there were still challenges for women in our industry at the start of my career. I've been a consulting engineer since I graduated from college, and I love what I do, but I had 2 small children at home, and I felt like I needed to be able to work and also raise my children with a little more flexibility than was allowed to women in the 1980s. It's easier today than it was then. Back then, it was much more stringent than it is today. So our industry has come a long way, and even further since the 1980s, in terms of gender acceptance, recruitment, and recognition. But I would love to see a day when I look at an audience and I see equal representation among genders, because it's going to take all of us to accomplish the goals we have to accomplish in the future. And I'm absolutely sure I'm not the only one that's faced challenges in my career on an individual basis, but now it is time to face our collective challenges. Because even today, after signing the Paris Climate Agreement, with a heightened focus on being climate aware, and along with all the catastrophic climate events we're witnessing routinely, the world still has a strong appetite for fossil fuels, which is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And this is not going to end overnight. Each year, humans across the globe emit more than 35 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. This video from NASA shows the global accumulation of CO2 over the course of just 1 year and how it moves across the globe between June of 2020 and July of 2021. And while seasons greatly affect the absorption of CO2, there's no doubt that we have an excess of this gas on our planet. But don't get me wrong, fossil fuels are a necessary energy source until we can make a clean energy transition, until our power grids can sustain increased electrical loading and be dependable during natural disasters, and until we have dependable power in remote areas of the globe where central power is not available nor reliable. We are not going to be able to end our dependence on fossil fuels immediately, but we can look at ways to reduce and accept the challenge of our day by reducing the dependence of our buildings on fossil fuels. For the last 3 years, ASHRAE has had the distinct honor of being involved in the UN's Climate Change Conference with leaders from around the world. And one of the most profound conclusions from these events is that the world is currently not on track to limit global warming by the 1.5-degree stretch goal of the Paris Climate Agreement, but instead global warming is estimated to rise by over 3 degrees Celsius by the year 2100 at this point. Researchers now say there's a 66% chance we will pass the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold between now and 2027. Breaking the limit for even just 1 year is a worrying sign that warming is accelerating. And while mitigation efforts may slow the rate of increase, they're not likely to reverse the trend. Science tells us that to keep global warming from rising by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius consistently, we need to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in just 2 decades from now, meaning our dependence on fossil fuels has to be addressed to meet this challenge. So, the climate crisis is here. If last decade was a time for talk, this decade is definitely a time for action. And whether you believe we're in a human-made crisis or experiencing a natural climate transition, based on scientific evidence, there's no doubt that humans are accelerating the change in the climate that we're experiencing. But there has to be hope, right? Otherwise, what do? Through human ingenuity and determination, we can find solutions to the global climate crisis. As ASHRAE volunteers and engineers, this is what we do. We accept challenges and we solve problems. Just a quick snapshot of some positive efforts that have occurred in recent years and what you can do as ASHRAE volunteers to accept the challenge of addressing the climate crisis and decarbonizing the global built environment. In 2022, China's total installed power was over 1,000 gigawatts. China is the leader in renewable energy installations around the world. The US is a distant second. In 2008, the government of British Columbia, Canada, which is already well ahead of the national and global curves with a carbon tax, began requiring local governments to include climate targets and plans in their community planning and growth strategies. And you all know this very well, that New York City and several other cities and states throughout the US are implementing building performance standards with a focus on carbon reduction. Renewable energy has been the largest source of new electricity generation on Earth since 2015. And it will take the combined efforts of ASHRAE engineers, architects, and other building professionals to address the challenges of the building sector's impact on climate change. We have to augment the skills we have with new information necessary to design buildings for a climate-adjusted future. And understanding how climate change and resulting natural disasters affect building performance, design, planning, construction, and operation is necessary to properly design projects going forward. And ASHRAE's thought leadership in the area of building decarbonization is recognized now more than ever. In 2019, the American Institute of Architects commissioned a blue ribbon panel to determine organizational influences in addressing the challenges of the future. In the panel's document, titled Disruption, Evolution, and Change, ASHRAE is cited as being, and I quote, best positioned to play a significant role in facilitating transition to the higher performance levels proposed in their plan. As a significant provider of industry training and continuing education, ASHRAE is recognized as a leader in the accelerated transfer of knowledge to achieve the plan's goals. Other organizations need us, and we need them. We're going to all need to work together to accomplish what we have to accomplish moving forward. So in order to address the coming challenges to our industry, we obviously have to commit to action. And ASHRAE has committed to the following efforts: equipping our members with sufficient knowledge and tools to design resilient new and renovated buildings so we can address the impact of the built environment on climate change. We have accepted this challenge. Expanding our efforts of designing energy-efficient buildings by being cognizant of all aspects of carbon reduction in buildings, including embodied carbon, refrigerant use and reduction, and end-of-life carbon. We've accepted this challenge. And providing meaningful leadership, action, resources, and advocacy to the global built environment in response to the challenges of the climate crisis. We've accepted this challenge. In order to equip our members with the knowledge needed for our climate advocacy efforts, we have a task force for building decarbonization, which Carrie's going to talk about their work. They have laid out a roadmap for our organization to follow and are providing guidance, education, and training for our members to use on their journeys. ASHRAE's focus on building energy efficiency is as important today as ever because the cleanest energy is still energy not used. 7 guides are being developed along with how-to videos, providing practical information and applications for our members to understand how to design new and renovate existing buildings to reduce or eliminate carbon emissions. Our Grid Interactive Building Guide and our Building Performance Standard Guide have been released to date, with the remaining guides being released this society year. Carrie's going to go into more detail on those guides as we go forward. We're also providing training through the ASHRAE Learning Institute courses focusing on building decarbonization, as well as providing invaluable technical guidance focusing on our commitment of reducing carbon with our Building Decarbonization resource page on our website. We've also expanded our focus from providing guidance on energy-related carbon, or operational carbon, by focusing on the whole life cycle of carbon in buildings. This is the carbon that goes into our buildings during construction, during the building life, and during its demolition. We're retooling the focus of our existing standards to address carbon as well as energy, including our major standards like 90.1, Standard 100, and the International Green Construction Code. ASHRAE is addressing the greenhouse gas emissions of refrigerants in Standards 15 and 34. We all know we're in the middle of a messy refrigerant transition phase, and refrigerants are a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions each year. And our task force is discussing how to address this within the ASHRAE structure. We have also developed 2 new standards addressing carbon as well as energy. Standard 228 was recently released. Where's Paul? Who was chair of that standard, right? Yep, thank you. Which provides a standard method of calculating zero net energy and zero net carbon building performance. And Standard 240P, which is in the final stages of addressing public review comments, will provide a methodology to assess greenhouse gas emissions associated with buildings over their life cycle. We work to integrate a carbon reduction focus throughout our ASHRAE committees, councils, and leadership, and provide our industry with a clear indication of our commitment to this issue. We have several other initiatives underway with a plan for their completion this society year. Our Honors and Awards Committee is developing a new award based on carbon metrics named after Eunice Foote. We hope the first awardee to be at our 2024 annual conference coming up in June in Indianapolis. And last year, ASHRAE's Hellenic chapter held ASHRAE's first decarbonization conference in Athens, Greece. In the fall of 2023, we expanded the focus of that conference with an industry-wide decarbonization conference that was sold out in the Washington, D.C. area, where we brought together architects, engineers, owners, facility managers, and operators to talk about how we as an industry can address the building's impact on climate change. Next week, we have our 3rd decarbonization conference in Madrid, Spain. And we're in the planning stages of our next decarbonization conference. You guys probably know about that. Coming up here in New York City, the 2024 ASHRAE Conference for Decarbonizing Existing Tall Buildings, which is supported by NYSERDA in New York State. And Adam is chair for that, right? Yep. Yep. Good. Thank you guys for all your work on that. As Scott said, we're also leading the industry by working to reduce our own Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions as an organization. We have a team of members that are researching and understanding our society's carbon footprint with the goal of reducing our own impact on climate change. What we've determined so far is that for the 2 years that we've monitored is that our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions have declined, mainly because our ASHRAE headquarters building now is effectively net positive, while our Scope 3 emissions have increased because we are traveling more with our elimination of our reduction on travel because of COVID. So we're traveling more, so our Scope 3 emissions have gone up, but we're offsetting our travel of our senior officers this year, looking to reduce our Scope 3 emissions moving forward. And as part of this effort, we're going to be providing guidance to our ASHRAE chapters so you guys can work to understand, improve, and reduce your carbon footprint. Also new this year is our Decarbonization Challenge Fund. So this is a fund that we set up so that we could get the decarbonization focus to the chapter and regional levels. It's a grant program. We were going to give grants up to $10,000 per chapter for programs that reduce carbon at a local level. We were anticipating 3 programs. We had 43 applications. We awarded 9 programs for a total of $65,000 to chapters. And they got their checks if you were at the President's Luncheon in Chicago, and they're going to be discussing their projects in Indianapolis in June. So, we've come full circle. It's our time to act again. We did it in the 70s, and we need to do it again today. We've accepted this challenge. Personally, the more I read and understand about the climate crisis, the more I feel compelled to change the way I think about my impact on the world, to leave it in the best shape possible for my kids and my future grandkids. Everyone can help limit climate change. From the way we travel, to the food we eat, to the electricity we use, we can make a difference. Now, here's a collective challenge for everybody. Y'all ready for a challenge? Everybody awake. Ready for a challenge? Raise your hands. All right, challenge. Educate yourself on these topics and initiatives that I've highlighted and be an advocate for change, right? Accept the challenge of passing your knowledge along to others, to your colleagues, to other industry professionals, to those in your community. We think that people know how much buildings contribute to climate change, but most people don't equate buildings to greenhouse gas emissions. So that conversation needs to be had. You can accept this challenge 100 different ways. You can increase your knowledge through attending an ASHRAE Learning Institute course. Download free guidance from our Building Decarbonization resource page. Learn from others who might be further along on their journey of understanding and be an advocate for change. Pick one or more and take action. The more I learn, the more I realize what a daunting task it is to understand all of the concepts, the research, the endless data, and the countless viewpoints on how best to address the climate crisis. I challenge you to rely on ASHRAE's more than 125 years of research and dedication to the built environment. And I challenge you to be part of finding new solutions through your participation. ASHRAE has accepted the challenge of our time, and we need everyone to join us. So let's learn as much as we can, and let's implement what we learn. And let's build a better world for ourselves, for our children, and for generations to come. I've accepted this challenge, and I hope that you'll join me. Thank you very much.